Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today. We will talk about Constructor, and I will also demonstrate to you how to create a constructor. And this is a continuation to the previous topic that we discussed. And by this time, you should already know how to instantiate objects. So another thing that is important to learn when studying object oriented programming language is something we call constructor. Constructors are very helpful so that we can easily uh, initialize our values or the attributes as we instantiate objects. So, along the way, you will learn how to create and how to use two types of constructors. So, in terms of the objectives of the lesson, you will be able to set a constructor later or create a constructor yourself later. I will again demonstrate it to you. You will also learn another topics in programming that are very essential, especially with OOP, and these are parameters and arguments. So later you will also be able to set parameters and you will also be able to pass arguments. So without much further ado, let's talk about constructor. What is a constructor? So in Java, a constructor is a special method. So one thing that you need to understand about constructor is it is a method. So you have already created methods yourselves before. So that means it's how it looks like in terms of its syntax is very familiar to you. Is very familiar to you if you imagine it because you have already created methods yourselves. So this special method, which we call constructor, is used to initialize objects. So that means we can use constructor if we want to put initial objects or initial attributes or values to our objects. So later I'm gonna show a demonstration. The constructor is called when an object of a class is created. Again, the other term for the word creating object is instantiating object. And as I have discussed a minute ago, a constructor is used to set initial values for object attributes, meaning we can put initial first set of values to our attributes or to the attributes that we declared in our class. Now, the our topic a while back, which focuses on object instantiation, we created attributes or we set our attributes with no values first. So when we declared them to our class, initially it has no values. But what if we want to put initial values to our objects or to our attributes? Okay, so the answer to that question is to use a constructor. So to demonstrate how to use a constructor, I want you to observe the following codes. Okay, and this class is a student class, and as you can see, we have these attributes and we have these behavior set of behaviors. So for the attributes, we identified name, course, and student number, or in our case, uh, or in the case of my students, we call it EDP number. So as you can see, attributes here have no value so far. Because by the time we instantiate objects later for student class, we need to be able to set values for the instantiated objects. So we say, for example, if we declare two objects here, student 1, okay, And let's say we will create another object for student 2. Okay. We need to say student 1 dot name. Try to run this first. Okay. Say the name of the first object or the first student is Mark, and the name of the second object is Lester. Okay. Let's try to copy this to another file. Okay. Let's restart. Okay, and then let's create a class in the object. Again, the keyword for instantiating object is new. Let's try to run it once more. Why? Oh, okay. This is not a method, so yeah. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is um, we declare the second object. Okay, and for us to be able to put value to our first object, we call the name. Okay, and let's say the name of this object is Mark, and the second object's name is, let's say, Lester. Okay. So for us to be able to put value to the declared attributes here, we need to be able to do this way. Okay, what if we want to uh, indicate or put initial values? What if that's the case? Okay, because if we run this one, if we run this code with the name of the student, okay, and we concatenate it, we call it plus one, we will now be able to get Mark because that's the name of the first. Okay, sorry. Ayan, Mark, because that's the name of the first object. But what if we want to initialize it with initial objects? I mean, values. And this is synonymous to saying default values. What if we do it that way? We need to be able to use a constructor. And constructors, as what I have discussed a while back, are methods. Okay, meaning it looks like this one because this is a method and this one is also a method. Now, a constructor, if we go back to this side, okay, a constructor name must match the class name and it cannot have a return type like void, meaning we don't usually put the word void or the return type void, just like the other methods out there, because a constructor is a special method, and the name of that method must match with your class name. Okay. Another thing is constructor are called when the object is created using the new keyword. So each time we instantiate, each time we create an object, the constructor is called. Okay. So if we to use a or to create a constructor, we do it this way. First things first, it must have the same name with the class. So meaning our class name is student, the method's name must also be a student. So you do it that way. And by the way, constructors must be at the top of the other methods. So we have two methods here, and we have this method. Okay, so this is called a constructor. It must have the same name with the class name, rule number one, and rule number two is it must not have a return type, such as this one, public void. So how do we initially put values to our attributes? Because a constructor is used to initialize the attributes. So I'm now gonna be discussing to you before I continue uh, something we call a parameter. Okay, but before that, you must first know that there are two types of constructors. Number one, default. Number two, parameterized. So actually, parameterized is going to be demonstrated later, but the easy way is the basic example of a constructor is what we call a default constructor. Okay, so we will make a default value for the following values, for the following attributes. So we say name, and for course, let's say the default value of course is yes, IT, and then student number. Let's say the default is 123. Okay. So what is going to be the impact? What will happen then? Now that we have set a default value for each of the attributes, what will happen now is if we remove this one, okay, and if you try to display the value, the name of student one here, you are gonna be getting the value of, okay, another mini error. Do not forget the equal sign. Okay. What will happen is you are going to get the value of Juan de la Cruz because that is our default value here. That's why it's called the constructor. It will construct default values as we instantiate objects. Okay. Now, if you are going to copy this one and try to get the name of student 2, you will also get the same name. Okay, because their default values, the value of this attribute is Juan de la Cruz. So ideally, we don't want this. So you will get the same result unless you change the attribute. So we say, okay, we change it to Mark. In this case, student 1 name has now been changed from De La Cruz to Mark. So Mark will now be used because we change it here instead of Juan de la Cruz. However, student 2 did not change the name. So student 2 will retain the same name, Juan de la Cruz. However, student 1, since we have changed it here, it will have the name Mark. So if you run it, student 1 will have the name Mark and student 2 will have the name Juan de la Cruz. Okay, so this is what we call a default constructor. Now we have an exam. We have something we call parameterized constructor. What is a parameterized constructor? Okay, a parameterized constructor will allow you to um, set the name. Okay, it will allow you to set the attributes in an easier manner compared to this compared to using this mechanism. So how do we do it? We do it by uh, using variables, indicating variables inside this method. So any variables, okay, any variables that you put inside the parentheses inside this one of your method is called parameter. So how many values do we need to set? So we have three attributes, meaning we need to set three values. One for the name, one for the course, one for the student number. So we will say string, and since name is already taken, we cannot use name anymore because the two variables in the same class is not allowed unless we use uh, unless we use this keyword. However, using this keyword is going to be discussed next meeting. So we need to think of another variable name for uh, to be used so that we can ask for value of name, and then the value of name will be passed to this variable. Okay, so we say string, let's say s name, and then we have string for the course, we say s course, and we have string for student number, we just say s number. Okay, and then what will happen is we will take s name here, we will take s course, okay, here, and then we will take s number here. So these variables, these values, okay, these variables are called parameters. In programming, we call this parameters. So parameters are variables that expect for values coming from the user. So whatever we pass, quote unquote, here for S name, S course, and S number, okay, as you can see, this is in equal sign. In this case, this is called an assignment operator because we are assigning it, meaning whatever is the value of S name here, okay, whatever is the value of S name here will be assigned to name. Remember, our name is a property here, an attribute. Okay, so whatever value we get from S name will be, as you can see, given to name. And whatever value we get from S course will be given to course. Here, it is an attribute. And whatever value of S number will be we get from S number will be transferred to student number, which is another attribute here. So how do we use this? Instead of using this way, instead of typing it this way to set the name of Mark, we can now directly type it here. Okay, so the first value asked by student constructor or student class here, the constructor student class here, is the name. So that means for object 1, student 1, okay, we can set the name first, Mark. Okay. Then the second value that is expected to the second parameter or the second value that is expected to receive S course is a course. So meaning we type a course here. We say yes IT. Lastly, the number, student number, or the ID number of the student. So it is for student number attribute here. Okay, so we type here a student number. So we say 1, 2, 3. So that means you no longer have to write put it this way. Okay, course. Okay. And lastly, spelling wrong. Okay. So just in case you are wondering why I use string for a student number, because the ID number of a student will never be used in any arithmetic operations, or it will never be used for calculation. So it's all right to use string. So in this case, this way is no longer useful or no longer relevant. Why? Because we now use a constructor. Again, a constructor is used to initialize an object. So that's why we can indicate it here now. So as we instantiate object which we call student 1 here, we can initialize it to contain or to get the following values. Okay? And that's why we have constructed it. Okay? So meaning this will now be irrelevant. So you can remove this one because at the time when we initiated the object here, we can directly and we have directly indicated the values. So this is easier and faster. Okay, and so with object number 2. Just copy the values here, and then paste it here. Let's say Lester is A and 4, 5, 6. Okay. So notice that these are real values. So we gave real values. However, in this case or in this class, we are indicating what type of value to be received. So in this case, these are variables. In this case, this is called parameters. Okay, however, the real values that we passed, we have given, okay, or we have indicated as we instantiated an object. Okay, and meaning these are real values. Okay, this is called arguments. So in other words, the values that you expect to receive, okay, the values that you expect to receive and be stored on these variables in these variables are called parameters. Okay, and the values that you the real values that you have given are called arguments. So arguments are the exact true real values that you have given, and the values that are expected to be given are called parameters. Okay, so if we run this program, student 1 must now have the name Mark and student 2 must now have the name Lester. Okay, student 1 is name student's 1 name is now Mark, student 2 name is now Lester. Let me try to rerun it again. Okay, if we want to display the number ID number of the student, okay, student number. Okay, student number. Okay, of course, you change this to student number. Okay, and change this to student as well. Okay. For student number one, it will be 1, 2, 3, and student number three is 4, 5, 6. Okay. This is how we use a parameterized constructor. And uh, a while back, we have used a default constructor. Okay. Now, parameters can also exist in behaviors or in methods. So in this case, what if I really want to determine the exact subject I enrolled? Because as of now, it's so generic. If we want to enroll a subject, we say student one dot enroll subject, and student two did not enroll, rather student two dropped a subject. Okay. So as you can see, the message is too generic. Okay, the student one has enrolled a subject. Okay, let me just edit it. This is supposed to be dropped, not enrolled. Okay. So if we say student one enrolled a subject, so we say the student has enrolled a subject. Student two dropped a subject, so we say the student has dropped a subject. But that's too generic. What if I wanna specifically include or put what kind of subject I enrolled? And what if I want to specifically put or include what subject did the student drop? So in this case, we can use parameters. So we say we put string subject name. Okay. Also here, string subject name. A while back, I told you do not use uh, two variables with the same name. In this case, this is completely fine because this variable only exists here. Okay, and this variable, which has the same name with this variable, is fine to be used and to appear again because this variable only exists here. Okay, so however, the explanation, the discussion I gave you a while ago, for in the case of name, course, and student number, we cannot use name here because name, the variable name has the same name with a variable name that exists outside this method, and in this case, this one. Okay, in programming, we call this global variables, meaning these variables exist in all parts of the program, whereas these variables s name, s course, s number, subject name, and subject another subject name only exists exclusively here. Okay, remember you have an opening and an ending, meaning this has its own world, okay, or coverage. So in this case, these variables are called local variables. Okay, so in other words, this is fine. If we run this one, okay, we got um, a feedback that it's not completed, so there's no issue so far. And hence, because this method, this behavior now expects a value to be received, okay, and since we did not indicate any value here, if you run this one, we will encounter an error because we did not put any value. Okay, so again, this is called a parameter. Okay, subject name. It's declared string because it's a subject name. Okay, so in this case, we need to include a variable or a value or an argument. Okay, an argument. That is not the correct term. So I want to enroll English, and student two dropped math. So if we run this one, the message, and of course we need to edit this one because we now have an exact value. So we will now remove this one, the generic message, and we will make it more specific. We can now concatenate and add subject name. And the same story goes here. So if we run this one, we can now see the word English. Okay, the student has enrolled English, and for student number two, the student has dropped math. Okay, so this is uh, the concept of parameters and arguments. So to continue, what is the difference of methods and constructors? So a Java constructor is used to initialize the state of an object. Again, remember from the early discussions that we had, when we say state, that is synonymous to attribute or characteristics. A method, however, is used to expose the behavior of an object. Okay, so a constructor must not have a return type, whereas the method must have a return type, like void. A constructor is invoked implicitly, meaning of invoke called. Okay, a constructor is called implicitly. Okay, whereas the method is invoked explicitly, meaning by the time you instantiated an object, right away the constructor will be called. However, for the case of the method, it will only be called unless you call it. Okay. Uh, Java compiler provides a default constructor if you don't have any constructor in a class. Actually, uh, this means that even if you don't, in this case, even if you don't create a constructor in this case, if I'm gonna remove it, okay. Essentially, if you notice, our program will still run. In this case, even if we don't put a constructor, actually what happens is inside Java, actually it creates its own constructor. Okay? But usually we want to create our own constructor. Because we have different values. Because we need different values. Or because we want to put different values. That's why ideally we put our own constructor. Okay? So essentially, with Java, even if you don't put or write a constructor, actually what it does is it builds its own constructor with its own values. And usually these values are null values, or it doesn't have any value, okay, at all. Now, because it's ideally and essentially we have our own values, own different values, we create our own constructor. Okay. So, against method, the method is not provided by the compiler. The compiler here, for now, do not be confused with the word, it only means Java. For now, think about Java. So, meaning the method is not provided by Java itself because you need to create your own method. Okay? The constructor name must be the same with the class name. So, in this case, as you can see, okay, our constructor is called student because our class is called student. Okay, the method is okay. Method name may or may not be the same as the class name. Okay, so we have the following behaviors: enroll subject and drop subject. You can name your own method. Again, follow this format. This is called camel case. With creating methods, you need to follow this format. Camel case because if your method is composed of two words, enroll and subject. We usually capitalize the first letter of the second word, such as this one, subject. So in this case, we capitalize S. Okay. But with class name, we usually capitalize the first letter and the second letter, just this case, student name. So we capitalize S and M. Okay. So summary, your programs have a constructor by default. Actually, what happens is, again, Java makes its own constructor. You just don't see it. It has null values. Null is just nothing. Okay. When we say null, it is not the same with saying zero. Zero is a value, technically. So when we say null, it's just nothing. Okay. However, you can specify your own constructor because most of the time we have our own values, and that's a reality. So most of the time we create our own constructors. Constructors are methods that must have not return types. So we don't put void, such as this one. So it's just, we put it that way. It's easy as that. And then constructors can either be default or parameterized. So a while back, I showed you an example of default constructor. In this case, we now have parameterized constructors. I think that would be all for now. For questions and inquiries, you may comment it on this video. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.